Hello and welcome to the Functionally Enlightened podcast with Dr. Sharon Sarita. We interview well-respected medical and functional practitioners, as well as patients who have overcome disabling chronic conditions, such as dysautonomia, and reclaimed their health. These enlightened guests provide helpful tips on managing chronic pain and illnesses, using a combination of traditional and whole-body healing modalities. If you're interested in natural healing and quality of life improvement, you're in the right place. Thank you for listening to today's episode.
Hello, everyone. We're thrilled to welcome Dr. John Lewis, who is the founder and president of Dr. Lewis Nutrition. And this is I believe, our third episode of the new year. So just really, we're diving into all things related to dysautonomia, mast cell activation. But he's a very special guest, going to bring a lot of knowledge to the table for us, because he's had a lifelong passion for empowering others through clinical nutrition. And we talk a lot about metabolic typing and how pivotal the change and consistency of diet can be with chronic illness. So Dr. Lewis has made it his mission to demonstrate how nutrition, supplementation, and exercise can profoundly transform health. Dr. Lewis brings an impressive background, including over 30 groundbreaking studies and 180 plus peer-reviewed publications. That is amazing. I can only imagine the hours and hours you've spent on research and collaborating with your colleagues. So his work on Alzheimer's disease has not only been published in leading scientific journals, but it's also earned him the honor of delivering a TEDx Miami talk on improving brain health through dietary supplementation. So again, Dr. Lewis, we appreciate your time and just really looking forward to learning a little bit about you and what you do.
Thank you, Dr. Sarita, for having me. It's my pleasure to be here. I look forward to our conversation today. Thank you for that kind introduction as well.
How did you become an advocate for health and specifically physiology, right?
I studied physiology in graduate school, more really at that point in my life, more of an interest in exercise than nutrition. I became a drug-free competitive bodybuilder for a few years, starting toward the end of undergrad and then through grad school. But I realized pretty quickly I was not interested in taking drugs. I didn't want to go down that path. I didn't see the risk being worth that. And I also realized pretty quickly I was never going to make a living as a bodybuilder. With all due respect to people that do that all the time, it's just, I couldn't see myself being a working professional in one field and then trying to be this competitor in such it's demanding. If you know anything about bodybuilding, it's incredibly demanding. But what bodybuilding did for me was it completely shifted my approach to nutrition. And in fact, I didn't even realize it at that time, but it actually was sort of the beginning of my shift from looking at exercise as being our most important lifestyle behavior to actually nutrition. And so I always give bodybuilding that much credit anyway, even though it may have taken a couple of years off of my life, getting down to 3 or 4% fat a few times. You may think those people are healthy just from having such low body fat and being muscular and all that, but really, I don't know that really is truly that healthy for you for, years or decades of being that lean. I don't know I don't see any scientific evidence that that's actually the case. I mean, certainly we want to be lean. We don't want to be overweight or obese by any stretch of the imagination, but to be that lean, especially women, we know for women, if you get too lean, you start losing your periods. You have other things metabolically that happen to women. So I don't know, bodybuilding may not necessarily be the healthiest thing in the world you can do, but nonetheless, I still train in sort of a bodybuilding routine type. My body responds to it well. I have a propensity for being muscular. So my body actually enjoys that type of training as opposed to more aerobic or cardiovascular. But as I was going through graduate school and then at some point along the way, figured out I was going to do research for a while. I met a couple of people who introduced me to their stories about polysaccharides that up until that point, I really had no clue beyond saccharides being a source of fuel for the cells. I had no idea the enormous potential with these two that my colleagues and I ended up spending, nearly the last 20 years studying, and those are from aloe vera and rice bran. So when I met Dr. Reg McDaniel on the aloe vera side, and Barbara Kimley on the Rice Brand side and started listening to their stories and just the profoundness and the incredible effects that had happened in their lives. They literally changed me. I mean, it wasn't just like a career thing, it was a life thing. And that's really why I'm talking to you here today. You mentioned we conducted that Alzheimer's study that was just so incredible, so rewarding, not just from a scientific perspective, but from a human interest, helping people perspective. And so that's why I am who I am, because I've been very lucky and I'm grateful for luck, fate, whatever it is, being in the right place at the right time to meet people who helped mold me and help create who I am today. And I kind of look at myself as being somebody in the middle of a relay race. And every time I do an interview, it's, me passing on the baton to the next person to share this information and this knowledge that I've gained over the last 20 years, because it truly is such profound information about how these polysaccharides can help people, regardless of your age, regardless of your sex, regardless of your health condition. It literally does not matter. If you can open your mouth and swallow, you can take these polysaccharides and benefit from them. And I'm happy to talk more about that research, but that's just kind of a background of who I am and what I'm doing and why I'm here today.
Yeah, it all sounds very fascinating, but for our listeners who aren't aware of what polysaccharides are, where they can find them, and what they do for brain cognition, among other chronic conditions that they may be experiencing.
So I love the word polysaccharide for the sense that it's a very technical term, but it's the most complex form of sugar. So if you look at the root of the word poly, many, saccharide, sugar, and just so everyone's clear, saccharide, carbohydrate, sugar, those are all synonyms. So I don't know about you, but I look at sugar as being one of the if not the most misused, certainly one of the most misused words in nutrition, because you constantly hear people, these so-called experts that make this blanket statement, all sugar is bad for you. Mm-hmm. That's wrong. That's an ignorant statement. There are many sugars that Mother Nature creates. And so when you throw the baby out with the bathwater with that statement, factually, you're wrong. And you're just being ignorant because you don't know that there are lots of different sugars in Mother Nature. So for example, high fructose corn syrup is a monosaccharide, one saccharide sugar, one molecule of sugar. And I think most people, including myself, would agree that if you're eating high fructose corn syrup every day, it's in everything, right? I mean, if you're drinking soda, certainly, or eating all these, we don't have to knock particular companies, but all these garbage brands that are just pushing, all of this sugary, fatty, salty crap, food-like stuff. What are you doing? You're setting yourself up for metabolic problems sooner than later, probably, actually. But that's one type of sugar. And I think a lot of times people think sugar, they think high fructose corn syrup or sucrose, and they just lump everything in that one basket. Again, that's wrong. That's factually incorrect. Polysaccharides are complex sugars. At the root of what they are carbohydrates, saccharide sugars. But these two in particular that I've mentioned from aloe vera and rice bran, I would argue are the most healthy, health-promoting, beneficial compounds that we can put in our body. And that's not just my opinion. That's based on all of our science that we've published, along with a lot of research around the world. I mean, these two particular plants, aloe vera and rice bran, have such incredible nutritional content to them. And so the polysaccharides in particular that come from these two plants are just so incredible. And so it drives me up a wall anytime I hear this statement, all sugar is bad for you. No, it's not true. It depends on the sugar. It depends on the source of it and its biochemical complexity. And so these polysaccharides, unlike the high fructose corn syrup, that's a relatively simple molecule, biochemically speaking, these polysaccharides are very, very complex. They're like 5D figures. You cannot even draw them on a piece of paper. They have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of glucose units attached together by these very sophisticated glycosidic bonds. And within all of that complexity, all of that structure is the coded information that our genes interpret. Anytime we put something into our system, our genes interpret that information, and then they guide the cells in how to function to our benefit or to our detriment, depending on what we're feeding it. And so when you compare these polysaccharides to amino acids, fatty acids, certainly vitamins and minerals, these are very simple structures. they are more coated with, they have more complex coded information than anything else we will put in our body, at least naturally. I don't know about synthetic stuff. And so that's the reason, that's an underlying theory, in addition to the fact that our cells, every cell in our body needs these polysaccharides, these sugars, when they do certain things at the organelle level. And so this is the reason why when you provide this fuel to the body that you don't get from food, I mean, I don't know about you, we actually have aloe vera growing in our yard, but we're not out there every day, snipping leaves and sucking the gel down. It tastes nasty, number one. And number two, it's 99% water. So the polysaccharide content in that gel is very diluted. But we've done the hard work for everyone. We've put this in a concentrated powder at a dose where people can actually benefit from it therapeutically or physiologically. So again, I don't care if you're into this new carnivore movement, whatever that means. I'm totally not into all that. Even the paleo keto crowd, they're also pushing very low carb typically. But even with those people, like, don't be so blinded or so closed-minded that you think you can't benefit from a few hundred milligrams or even a gram or two a day of these polysaccharides, because that's what we're talking about. And in the context of whatever the average American is eating today, 2,500, 3,000, 3,500 calories, I don't even know, but that's a very, very small amount of material in comparison to what your typical macronutrient intake is. So you're not going to screw yourself up with your ketosis regimen, or you're not going to be harmed because you think humans should only eat beef all day. It's not going to throw you off of that unless you have some strict philosophical reason for not consuming anything from a plant. I guess that's your own, choice, but you're being ignorant, quite frankly, if that's where you are.
Yeah, and I know a handful of people that I work with, they are on a strict carnivore diet. They have been on one for literally, approaching 2 years. And this is to tame down some of the neurological symptoms that they were feeling. But at this point, there's also the malnutrition component. We know there's a lot of nutritional deficiencies there. We can see it in their labs. I'm not saying that's a blanket statement across the board. Maybe some carnivores are actually being able to maintain an adequate nutrient status. But for them, they have, a lot of the times they have a fear of, like you said, breaking ketosis and, those symptoms returning. So what are we talking about in terms of like a glycemic load if they incorporate these polysaccharides? What kind of change would they expect to see?
None. I mean, again, we're talking per dose, a couple of grams. And that's not just the polysaccharides, that's other things in the formula. That's N-acetylcysteine, some flaxseed, tart cherry, some ultra terra clay. It's a mix of 11 different ingredients, but for what my colleagues and I view in terms of the most important components of the formula would be the polysaccharides, just because they are so unique. And also because, again, you're not getting them from the diet. Going back to what I kind of got off on another tangent, but I don't know about you. I don't know anyone who eats aloe vera. And even if you did, it's not the best way to get your polysaccharides. If that's what you're trying to achieve, you're really wasting your time, because again, it's 99% water. So why drink that gel if you're trying to get a concentrated amount of the polysaccharides? And then on the rice bran side, most of the rice sold in the world is white rice. So that's the last layer of it. That's the white endosperm, the digestible starch. The bran is the layer that sits on top of it. That's brown rice, essentially. But most of the world doesn't eat brown rice. They want to eat white rice. So even if and I'm one of these people who I eat brown rice probably, I don't know, at least 3-4 days a week, if not 5 or 6 days a week. I don't know that I eat it every day, but we always have a tub of brown rice sitting in our refrigerator for a meal. But even then, I don't know that, just eating a half a cup of brown rice every day would give you the polysaccharide content that you need, especially if you're past middle age like I am, and especially if you have any severe health challenge. So you probably need a more concentrated dose. But again, we're only talking, maybe a couple of grams per day. We're not talking like, hundreds of calories or anything like that. We're talking a very small amount of material. And they just have such incredible benefit. That's why, for somebody who's that rigid about being carnivore or whatever, I'm thinking, well, you may have done that for weight loss purposes or inflammatory issues or whatever, and that's fine. To your point, I don't know, there is no long-term data, at least in clinical trials, about the carnivore diet. I don't know that we'll ever see any real meaningful clinical data just because it's so messy to tease out all the details. But just adding in, again, like a couple of grams of our product per day for somebody who's on that diet, and you get all of the anti-inflammatory, antioxidative, immune enhancing, modulating, boosting, whatever term people like to use. You get increased stem cell production. You balance different components of the immune system. You enhance your telomeres. I mean, there are just so many different things that we've been working on over these last 20 years that, man, really, you're like losing, if you're that rigid, you're losing out on an opportunity very special. Because for example, I've never seen any study using protein or fat. Just take your choice of any source of protein or fat. I've never seen any study that could even remotely compete to what these polysaccharides can do. And if that sounds arrogant, I'm sorry, but it's true, because there's nothing else out there like it. I mean, in our Alzheimer's study alone, for example, if you had a point, I'll shut up for a second. I did.
No, continue. I was actually going to ask you about the cognitive piece to this.
So in our Alzheimer's study, we looked at people with moderate to severe severity of the disease. These are people that Big Pharma basically has no interest in studying, right? I mean, they don't care about you at that stage. They may be interested in you with mild impairment, and I think they still devote money to that. But we wanted to look at the people who were most impaired because, again, they had no opportunity for participating in research. And Dr. McDaniel was actually giving a lecture prior to us running this study. He was giving a lecture one day. The only reason we even had the opportunity to run this study was because a lady in the audience heard him talk about his work with people with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and she felt very inspired. She and her husband had lost 4 family members to Alzheimer's disease, this terrible, tragic disease. And she and her husband got to know Dr. Reg, and then they ultimately decided to make a donation to research. They just required us to run a study in Alzheimer's disease. So that's the only reason, just through this generosity of this one family, that I'm even telling you about this. So that led us to choosing this very impaired group of people. Again, we could have looked at mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia, but we wanted to look at the sickest people. So we put them on our formula for 12 months. We assessed cognitive function with the ADAS-Cog and a couple of other tools at baseline, 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. And then we drew their blood at baseline and 12 months to look at all the different immune and inflammatory markers. But at 9 and 12 months, we showed clinically and statistically significant improvement in cognitive function. That's unheard of. You can look at the 5 FDA-approved drugs for dementia, any type of diet. And I know that Dean Ornish and his group, they just recently got a lot of publicity over a study they did with people with mild cognitive impairment. Again, a completely different population. But any kind of diet, lifestyle, exercise, hyperbaric oxygen, red light therapy, acupuncture, music, sound, you pick it. You go to PubMed yourself. I always kind of issue this little, half challenge to people listening to me. Go to PubMed yourself, pubmed.gov. Do your own literature search. It's the national clearinghouse of all scientific information essentially throughout the world. You will not find any other treatment, intervention, therapy, whatever you want to call it, that shows that kind of finding in people with Alzheimer's disease. I mean, I was so proud of that finding. Like when we were, running the study and getting anecdotal feedback from caregivers and staff members, it looked encouraging. I mean, it seemed like it was going to be potentially something really interesting that would ultimately turn out in the analysis. And sure enough, after we, ran the study, entered all the data, got it ready for statistical analysis, and Dr. McDaniel and I were so excited to look at the cognitive findings first. And sure enough, and by the way, that's according to the ADAS-Cog, that is the gold standard for assessing cognitive function, especially in people with dementia. It's been cited in probably thousands of papers for the last 40 years. And so that finding, that one finding alone again, blows away anything else that you will find in the literature. There's nothing else like it. And that first paper was published back in 2013. So this wasn't just yesterday. And that was kind of the beginning of the end of my academic career as well, where we were on top of this, what I thought was an incredible finding. We were going to get money from NIH and Alzheimer's Association and God knows who else to extend this work. And I tried twice with NIH, twice with Alzheimer's Association to get more funding. And you know what I got in return?
Questions?
I didn't even get, no, I wish I had gotten questions. I got a goose egg. I got zero, nada, zilch, nothing.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about where the funding really goes, if it's geared towards just the pharmaceutical industry versus, the supplemental protocols that people can take on independently. Absolutely. So I know you mentioned a few other ingredients in there, and you told us a relative amount of the polysaccharides in conjunction with a person's normal diet. But can you explain a little bit about how maybe the cofactors that you put into this formulation, how they kind of expand on what your study is showing?
Well, may I just tell you, your listeners, a couple of other very important results of our study, and then I'll answer that question.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because I think it's important. You have the clinical or the practical finding, but then you say, well, physiologically, or what explains that, right? Mechanistically, what's going on? So we had three very important aspects to this. Actually, four in another paper we published, but I'll just stick to the first three. Number one, we had an improvement in the CD4 to CD8 ratio. That's your helper cell to your cytotoxic cell ratio. Very important for all of us, not just for people with Alzheimer's. And we showed an improvement in inflammation according to TNF alpha and VEGF. Both of those decreased over that 12-month period. Our paper was probably the first that published that in people with Alzheimer's. That had never, to our knowledge, been published before in people with Alzheimer's in response to any intervention. And then finally, we showed an increase in CD14 cells, which are a marker of adult stem cells, of just under 300% over that 12-month period. So when you put increasing your overall immune function, lowering inflammation, and increasing adult stem cell production, for us, it very clearly said, okay, these are at least part of the mechanisms of why people's cognitive function came back. So just that paper, and by the way, I'll also mention that first paper and we've published 4 papers from that study. The first and the last were at the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. The middle 2 were with the Journal of Clinical and Translational Research. But Dr. Perry, who's still the editor of the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, he actually called me. This is the only time this ever happened in my career with any paper. When we submitted that first paper for publication, I got a call like a month later. Dr. Perry, the editor of the journal, called me up and he said, wow, Dr. Lewis, this paper is incredible. I'm going to publish this as soon as I get the reviews back from the reviewer. That was the one and only time that ever happened in my career with any kind of paper like that. So the editor of the journal was that excited, and he doesn't really, nutrition is not his area. But anyway, it was just an incredible paper. And so, it's really led me to where I am today. But to answer your question about the rest of the formulation, so for example, N-acetylcysteine, that's a very important ingredient in this formulation. We know that taking glutathione orally is a very difficult technical challenge because the hydrochloric acid in the stomach will break it down very rapidly. So oral glutathione is a very difficult product to achieve. But if you take N-acetylcysteine, that's one of the metabolic precursors to creating glutathione, which is roughly considered to be our master antioxidant. So that's very important to address, again, especially for people with such a serious health challenge. And then we have in there this material called ultra-terra clay. It's like a bentonite clay. It comes from a lake in Mississippi. It's a very, very old lake. So this clay is in this lake, and it's loaded with micronutrition. And it also is a very potent chelator of things like heavy metals, arsenic, PCBs, PHAs, all these things that are floating around today in the environment that you can't even escape, right? I mean, you can go all the way to Alaska, you still cannot escape this pollution. But this material, this clay, is a very potent chelator of a lot of these heavy metals and other materials that build up in us over time. So at the same time, we're providing nutritional content with all these other materials. We're pulling bad stuff out with the clay. So it's a very potent chelator, detoxifier, however you'd like to classify it. So we look at that material as very important as well. Then you have things like tart cherry I mentioned. It's a natural source of melatonin. Obviously, a lot of people with dementia or Alzheimer's disease have sleeping issues as well. So you can imagine, helping people on that level with that type of material. The flaxseed in the material is what is considered to be the best source of lignans of any plant in the plant kingdom. So a lot of people think of flax as purely just for the omega-3 content, which is obviously very true as well. But you combine getting the omega-3 along with this lignin that's a very potent anti-carcinogenic, anti-inflammatory phytonutrient. Now you're getting some really nice effect from that as well. We have wild yam in there, Dioscorea. Lots of yams in the plant kingdom again, but this particular wild yam is high in these different types of endocrine modulating materials. They've not been very well studied that much, quite frankly. I mean, it's kind of a speculative area of research, but again, for what little has been shown, they really help to modulate the endocrine system.
Isn't that the same ingredient used for bioidentical progesterone or hormones?
You know what? That's a good question. It might be actually. It might be one of those materials that they use for bioidentical hormones because it is very potent when it comes to boosting or modulating the endocrine system. I mean, we have other things like, gosh, I need to look at a label.
Well, everything that you're saying sounds fantastic, like all wrapped up in one supplement. When I'm thinking every piece that you've mentioned is a separate ingredient or separate product that I've been using, for instance, like IgG for immune modulation, the bioidentical progesterone, the detoxification. I do the same thing. I do activated charcoal, I do zeolite, I do all these other binders depending on what I'm targeting. So you said it was bentonite clay, correct?
Yes.
And that's usually gentle in the digestive system, and most people tolerate it fairly well. I would imagine maybe the hypersensitive, like highly sensitive person, the HSP, might struggle a little bit. But have you seen any like cases, or have you heard of anyone not being able to tolerate the supplement orally?
You know what so I've been working with this formula now, like I said, for almost 20 years. I can literally count on one hand the number of people that were their constitution or whatever was so sensitive that they said, I can't take this. It's literally not more than 4 or 5 people who have had that of an extreme reaction to it. So I mean, as far as and Dr. McDaniel, he got into this about 40 years ago. So I've been at it for almost 20. Combined, we're talking over 60 or close to 60 years of experience, not to mention several of our other colleagues who have also been at this for several decades. So you're probably talking a couple of 100 years of combined research and clinical experience in all this. We've yet to find, typically any drug that would have any interactive effects, like if you're taking, some high blood pressure, like a lot of people do, antihypertensive, antilipidemic, SSRI, whatever the class of drug. We haven't not seen any drug class that has any interactive polypharmacy effect. Again, the side effects are very rare. In fact, if somebody's having what they think is a side effect, which could be something like maybe they poop a lot, and I tell them, well, wait a minute, that's not a side effect. That's actually your body having a good reaction to the clay and even maybe the citric acid and the NAC, where you're actually starting to detoxify yourself. And so just if it feels uncomfortable, like if it's not diarrhea, but a loose stool or something, just back down on the dose. Don't go so aggressive on the dose, and then just work your way up more slowly. But sometimes you have to, help people understand that as well, that's actually not a bad sign. That's actually a sign that the product is helping the body cleanse itself.
Exactly. And preparing them, like you said, for those who are highly sensitive, maybe titrate on a much lower dose. If they're capsules, like open them and maybe in this case, would it be recommended to re-encapsulate due to the hydrochloric acid, or would it be okay to take it as a powder inside water, for instance?
So we have it in both forms, actually. We have the
Awesome.
powder, which is what we used in the study. And then we have, for those, people that complain about taste or texture, we said, okay, we're going to make a capsule version of it as well. So excuse me, we have it in both ways, or both, both formats. I think most Americans still prefer either a capsule or a tablet, although I know gummies are rapidly taking away people from some of the capsule tablet preferences. But for me personally, I take 2 scoops in the morning and 2 in the evening. And I usually, the morning dose, well, currently the afternoon dose because of my weird schedule, but is on an empty stomach. And then the evening dose is usually sometime a little after dinner. So I'm actually doing it both ways. A lot of times people will ask me, does it matter if it's an empty stomach or not? And I just say, I don't know. I mean, it's possible it could mix well with food. So maybe you get a little better absorption with some other material. But the most important thing to me is you just get it in your system so that it can have a chance to help you. And then take it with anything. The only thing I tell people not to do, especially with the powder, is don't mix it with like boiling coffee or tea or something. You want to not damage the nutrition with high heat. But otherwise, you can put it in your juice, your smoothie, your applesauce, mashed potatoes, yogurt, literally anything, oatmeal, cereal, literally anything that you mix, especially in something like a smoothie, you won't even taste it.
And
And
what
we
about for pediatric use? Is there a recommended dosage for?
Absolutely. So our daughter, she'll be turning 5 in March. When she turned 6 months of age, and we started introducing purees and solid food in her diet, I started giving it to her, and I would give her maybe like a half a scoop per day. And she takes now at 40, I think she's about 43 pounds. She takes a scoop a day. So, and then my wife, as I mentioned, maybe I didn't. So I've been, just to be clear, I've been on this formula for about a decade. My mother's been on it a few years longer than that. My wife started taking it over 5 years ago when she was pregnant. And as I mentioned, Angie started taking it 6 months ago, or I'm sorry, when she was 6 months of age. So this is literally, again, fetus to elderly. I won't out my mother's age. She's sensitive about that, and then all of us in between. So I like to tell people, especially somebody who's caring for another person, a spouse, a parent, or something like that, don't just think of the other person, think of yourself, because prevention is just as important as treatment or therapy. And I just don't know anything else. Maybe curcumin I'd put up there in terms of similar efficacy for all these wide-ranging, almost like pleiotropic effects. But man, these polysaccharides from aloe vera and rice bran, I don't know. I know I'm biased, so that kind of goes out with the window in terms of, looking at other things. And again, I'm giving curcumin a lot of credit. It's also obviously been studied a lot as well. But generically speaking, in terms of all these different wide-ranging effects, and people can go to our website and read more about it and learn more. And I'm happy to answer anyone's questions that maybe have questions. But I don't know. To me, like, you want to prevent diabetes, cancer, heart disease, neurodegeneration, all these things that are killing us. And the way you can help do that, I'm not saying it's the only answer. That's not true either, but it's certainly, in my opinion, one of your best tools in your toolbox.
Yeah. So these nutritional strategies that you build in, are there any other recommendations alongside building this into their supplemental protocol? Anything else that you can offer to people that is going to help boost the synergistic effects?
Well, I don't know about you and your practice, but I think for me, like looking at, and we had a student in our lab do a study on vitamin D back a few years ago, but we have 70% of Americans are either insufficient or deficient in vitamin D. Like, to me, it's just such an important material. If you're not living in Florida like we do, where you can get sun most every day, if you're in the northern latitudes, by all means, please take your D3 every day. Check your D level every year, and then add in your D3 and K2 product into your routine. I just think it's so important. And it's not about bones either, right? I mean, it's literally head to toe. I think I read one of a recent study that shows it's now interacting to be known with something like up to 4,500 genes at this point. So it's just an incredibly important material. And I think it's a very important thing to evaluate. And the test is pretty cheap. It's I think Life Extension sells a test for like $22 or something. It's pretty inexpensive way to test your level and see where you are. And if you are, and of course, we know optimal is very debatable. I've got a friend who thinks you should be over 100. I don't know if that's really necessary. I try to stay at least about 60. That's what my level usually is.
Yeah, we do similar, 50 to 80 being optimal. And then of
Right.
course, if you have some disease state might necessitate a little bit additional of supplementation. Most people do well starting with 2000 IUs, but from the clientele that I work with, they usually need something a little more potent. And like you said, with the K1, K2 cofactors, and that's just going off on a tangent. But I don't see anyone even in sunny Florida getting enough sunlight to
Right.
to remain in that optimal state year round.
It's difficult. Exactly. And then, of
Hmm.
course, things like magnesium, B12, iron. I mean, these are all things that we need to be conscious and aware of all the time to help us with, really completing our nutritional profile and hopefully optimizing our health.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love to get a link for the study that you mentioned, maybe both or two or three studies to share with our audience. And I definitely want to read the entire paper. Not sure if the abstract only is available or do we have access to the full document?
So for so we've had 4 papers from the Alzheimer's study, 3 from the MS study. If you go to PubMed and just search my last name and polysaccharide, actually all 7 articles should come up. You'll definitely get the abstract for all 7 articles. I think almost all of them you can get the full article as well. But if not, I mean, I'm happy if anyone wants to go to our website, drlewisnutrition.com, they can email me from there. And certainly I'll share all 7 articles with you. We can talk about that offline, but anybody can go to my website and get we have a phone number, email address. If people have more specific questions, they can definitely contact me. Just to respect copyright of the journal, I don't put like the full PDF on our website. I don't want to
Mhm.
have, a journal come after me like that, since we are a for-profit business. But certainly if people want to have the information, I'm happy to email them, that information so that way they can have it. And I think it is very important for people to have access to that information. So I mean, on that level, I've never restricted
Mhm.
anyone's request for information. Maybe I am, bordering on a copyright violation by doing that, but at least I don't put the full PDF on our website just to
Yeah.
respect, that level of separation, if you will.
Right, right. So we will definitely share the link from the PubMed wherever the article is cited, and people
Yes.
can at least visit the abstract and see if they want to read a little bit more. And where again can they reach out to find out more information and to maybe reach out to you directly?
It's, excuse me, it's drlewisnutrition.com. That's Dr. No period Lewis, Lewis, nutrition.com. That's the best source of, I mean, we have so much information on that website, probably more than most people will want to read, but we have lots of articles, videos, product reviews, testimonials. Our product is called Daily Brain Care that originated out of all this research.
Mm-hmm.
The FAQs section is extensive. I mean, there are probably lots of nuggets of information in there that people could review if they have questions. But again, if there always people have, something beyond what's on the website, you can certainly email or give us a call. And then we're under Dr. Lewis Nutrition on all the typical social media channels as well, although those will just be, short videos. They won't be like very in-depth, informative pieces, but for people that like social media experiences, we're there as well. So I'm
Okay.
happy to help anyone who has any questions about the research, daily brain care, anything else that I can do to help. I'm more than willing to do that.
Very good. We will provide all of the links on our show notes. And again, Dr. Lewis, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you sharing this valuable information. I think I'm going to trial the product myself, and I'm already in my head thinking how many people could benefit from using it on a daily basis. So
Beautiful.
I appreciate again your time and just thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to come back anytime and talk more about nutrition, health, and wellness.
Fantastic. And thank you to all of our listeners. We'll catch you on the next one. Take care.